There's a force within you that's simultaneously your greatest weakness and your greatest strength. An energy that can destroy empires or build them, that can drag men down to the abyss of mediocrity or elevate them to the pantheon of great achievers. Have you felt this force? Have you noticed how it whispers in your ears, promising instant pleasure, immediate relief, effortless gratification? But what if I told you that this same energy, when understood and transmuted, is precisely what separates ordinary men from conquerors, visionaries, empire builders? We're talking about sexual energy, not in the vulgar sense that modern society has taught us to understand it, but in its deepest and most transformative essence. Napoleon Hill, in his studies on the secrets of success of history's most powerful men, discovered something few dare to speak of. All great achievers learned the art of sexual transmutation. They didn't deny this primal force, didn't flee from it like cowards, but mastered it like warriors mastering their swords. But before we dive into this ocean of possibilities, we must first confront an uncomfortable truth. We live in an age where we've been conditioned to be slaves to our impulses. The easy pleasure industry has created a generation of men who waste their vital force in pursuit of fleeting gratifications, compulsive masturbation, pornography, superficial relationships based solely on the physical. These are all forms of escapism that drain the energy that should be channeled into building something grand. The modern man has been taught to see sexual desire as something that needs to be immediately satisfied, like an itch that must be scratched, like a thirst that must be quenched at the first well it finds. But the ancient Stoics and the great masters of human achievement knew something different. They knew that this energy is sacred, that it carries within it the power of creation. It's the same force that generates life, that perpetuates the species, that moves mountains of possibilities. When Marcus Aurelius wrote about self-mastery, when Seneca spoke about the discipline of the will, when Epictetus taught about the power of choice, they were indirectly talking about this transmutation, because there is no true personal power without mastery over this primal force that dwells within us. There is no building of an external empire without first conquering the internal empire. Imagine for a moment that within you there is a fire that can burn down your house or warm your family, that can destroy forests or forge the strongest steel. The difference lies not in the intensity of the fire, but in what you do with it. Most men let this fire burn unchecked, consuming their vital energy in ephemeral pleasures. But empire builders have learned to be blacksmiths of their own souls. They direct this fire to the forge of achievement. Sexual energy, when transmuted, becomes creative force. It becomes personal magnetism. It becomes that indefinable presence that makes others feel drawn, not just to your body, but to your essence. Have you met men like that? Men who exude power without needing to prove anything to anyone. Men whose mere presence transforms the environment. These men have discovered the secret of inner alchemy. But how does this work in practice? How do we transform impulse into empire, desire into discipline, passion into purpose? The answer lies in understanding that all energy that is not consciously directed becomes destructive. It's like dammed water that without a channel becomes a swamp. Without conscious direction, sexual energy manifests as anxiety, mental agitation, compulsions, addictions, toxic relationships, and a chronic feeling of existential emptiness. The first step on this journey of transmutation is recognition, recognizing that you have been a slave to your impulses, that you have wasted your vital force on fleeting gratifications, that you have sought outside of yourself what can only be found within. This recognition should not be accompanied by guilt or self-flagellation, but rather by a scientific curiosity about yourself, like a researcher who finally identifies the cause of a mysterious phenomenon. Observe your patterns. When do you feel the sexual impulse most intensely? At what times of day? In what emotional states? What external triggers activate it? You will realize that it is rarely just physical desire. Most of the time, it's an unconscious attempt to escape some emotional discomfort, some pressure, some emptiness. Compulsive sexual impulse is often a mask for deeper needs, a need for connection, for validation, for relief from anxiety, for escape from responsibility. The Stoics taught us that we cannot control the impulses that arise, but we can choose how we respond to them. This seemingly simple choice is where all the power resides. It's the difference between being a free man and being a slave to your own biological urges. When the impulse arises, instead of reacting automatically, pause, breathe, observe, ask yourself, where does this energy want to go? How can I channel it into something that elevates me instead of diminishing me? And here we arrive at the crucial point of transmutation. Sexual energy doesn't need to be repressed or denied. It needs to be redirected. It's like diverting the course of a powerful river to move turbines that generate electricity for an entire city. The force remains the same, but its purpose is infinitely elevated. When you feel this energy pulsing in your veins, instead of seeking immediate relief through masturbation or compulsive sex, channel it into your projects, into your dreams, into your ambitions. Go write that book. Go build that business. Go train your body. Go study that skill you've been putting off. You will be surprised by the power and mental clarity that emerge when you learn to ride this wave of energy instead of being swallowed by it. The power of transmutation, mastering your inner energy. Napoleon Hill observed that the most successful men he studied had something in common. They had learned to convert their sexual energy into creative energy. Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Andrew Carnegie, they all discovered that the same force that drove them sexually when redirected propelled them professionally. They became achievement machines because they learned to fuel their engines with the most potent fuel available, transmuted vital energy. But this process isn't merely mechanical, it's profoundly spiritual and psychological. When you begin to master your sexual energy, something shifts in your psyche. You develop genuine confidence because you know you can rely on yourself. You develop magnetism because you're no longer wasting your vital force. You develop presence because you're no longer fragmented between conflicting impulses. You become integrated, coherent, powerful. The ancient alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold. They weren't just talking about metals. They were talking about the transmutation of the lesser self, ruled by impulses and fears, into the greater self, master of oneself and architect of one's destiny. Sexual energy is the laboratory where this alchemy happens. It's where the lead of compulsion transforms into the gold of conscious achievement. And if you've come this far on this journey of understanding, if these words are resonating in your soul like bells awakening something dormant, then you've already taken the most important first step, the awakening of consciousness. But a journey like this shouldn't be traveled alone. So if you feel these truths can transform not only your next few months but the entire trajectory of your life, then subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell. Because what you're about to discover in the coming weeks goes far beyond what any course or book can teach. We'll delve into the practical secrets, the specific techniques, the daily rituals that history's great men used to channel this primal force toward extraordinary achievements. Each video will be a piece of the puzzle that will reveal how you can build your own empire, internal and external. Don't let this opportunity slip away. Subscribe now, because your transformation begins with this decision. But let's return to our exploration. There's a fundamental difference between repression and transmutation. Repression is when you try to deny the existence of sexual energy, when you push it into the depths of the unconscious hoping it will disappear. This not only doesn't work, it creates dangerous psychological distortions. Repressed energy doesn't vanish, it manifests in distorted ways. Inexplicable anger, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, various addictions, dysfunctional relationships. Transmutation, on the other hand, is a process of conscious recognition, acceptance, and redirection. You acknowledge the energy, accept its existence as something natural and sacred, and then consciously direct it toward higher purposes. It's like a martial arts master who doesn't deny the opponent's strength, but uses it to their advantage. The Stoics understood this profoundly. They weren't men who denied their human impulses, they were men who mastered them through reason and discipline. Marcus Aurelius wasn't an asexual saint. He was an emperor who knew both the pleasures of power and the temptations of the flesh, but who consciously chose how to relate to both. He knew that a man who cannot govern himself cannot govern an empire. When you begin this practice of transmutation, changes begin to occur that go far beyond what you could imagine. First, your overall energy increases dramatically. You wake up with more energy, work with more focus, relate with more presence. This happens because you're no longer wasting your vital battery on constant discharges of momentary pleasure. Second, your ability to concentrate multiplies. The sexually undisciplined mind is a scattered mind, always seeking the next stimulus, the next relief. When you learn to contain and direct this energy, your mind becomes like a laser, capable of an intensity of focus that seems superhuman to those who live in distraction. Third, your personal magnetism intensifies remarkably. People begin to gravitate toward you without understanding exactly why. Opportunities appear as if you've become a magnet for abundance. This isn't magic. It's the natural result of energy that's no longer being wasted but concentrated and radiated through your presence. Fourth, your ability to make difficult decisions and persist in long-term projects becomes extraordinary. Sexual energy is the energy of persistence, penetration, the ability to overcome resistance. When you channel it toward your professional and personal goals, you develop a willpower that can move mountains. But perhaps the most profound transformation is spiritual. You begin to understand that you were always far more powerful than you imagined, that you always had within you the capacity to shape your reality through the force of your directed will, that you were never a victim of your circumstances but a creator who didn't know how to use their creative tools. This understanding brings with it an immense responsibility. Because when you know you have the power to build empires, internal and external, you can no longer settle for mediocrity. You can no longer blame others for your life. You can no longer hide behind excuses and justifications. You become responsible for your greatness or your smallness. And here we find another fundamental Stoic principle, amor fati, the love of fate, but not a passive love that accepts whatever happens, an active love that embraces the responsibility of creating the destiny you deserve. When you master your sexual energy, you're not just controlling an impulse, you're taking command of your life in a way that few men dare to do. The practical process of this transmutation involves several dimensions. The physical, exercises that move and channel energy through the body. Conscious breathing that oxygenates not only the lungs but the entire vital experience. Nourishing food instead of sleep-inducing junk. Restorative sleep instead of merely interrupting wakefulness. The mental, disciplines that strengthen will and concentration. Meditation that teaches you to observe your impulses without being controlled by them. Study that feeds your mind with elevated ideas instead of empty entertainment. Visualization that allows you to see and feel the empires you are building before they even materialize. The emotional, the development of emotional intelligence that allows you to navigate the stormy seas of feelings without drowning in them. The ability to feel deeply without being devastated by emotions. The skill of using emotions as fuel for action instead of as an excuse for inaction. The spiritual, connection with something larger than your momentary desires. The understanding that you are part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful than your petty personal dramas. The perception that your vital energy is a manifestation of the universe's own creative force, and that wasting it is a form of cosmic blasphemy. All these aspects work together in the creation of a new man. A man who is no longer a slave to his impulses but a master of his destiny. A man who builds not just a business or a career, but an empire of consciousness that manifests in all areas of his life. And when we talk about empire, we're not just talking about material wealth, although it can certainly be a natural byproduct of this process. We're talking about an empire of positive influence, of creating value for the world, of the transformative impact that an integrated man can have on his family, his community, his professional sphere. History's great empire builders understood that true power doesn't come from dominating others, but from mastering oneself. It doesn't come from accumulating external resources, but from developing inexhaustible internal resources. It doesn't come from conquering geographical territories, but from conquering territories of consciousness that most men don't even know exist. Caesar conquered Gaul, but first he conquered himself. Alexander dominated the known world, but first he mastered his own fears and limitations. Napoleon reorganized Europe, but first he reorganized his own psyche around a grand vision of possibility. And you? What empire are you building? What legacy are you creating? What impact are you having on the world around you? Or are you wasting the strength that could move mountains on fleeting pleasures, on gratifications that generate no growth, on experiences that add no value to you or anyone else? Transmuted sexual energy is not just personal power, it's cosmic responsibility, because when you develop this kind of inner strength, you inevitably become a leader, an example, a beacon that others follow consciously or unconsciously. Your very presence becomes educational. Your way of being in the world becomes inspiring to those still enslaved by their impulses. And here we arrive at the most beautiful paradox of this journey. The more you master your sexual energy, the more sexually attractive you become. Not in a compulsive or desperate way, but in a magnetic and natural way. Because you exude the confidence of someone who knows they can rely on themselves. You project the presence of someone who doesn't need anyone to complete them, but consciously chooses with whom to share their completeness. Women feel this. Men respect this. Opportunities are drawn to this, not because you're trying to impress or manipulate, but because you've become genuinely impressive. You've developed that rare quality in the modern age, integrated authenticity. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of this transformation is the relationship you develop with time. Most men live in a state of chronic urgency, always chasing after gratifications, always trying to escape the present moment through some form of pleasure or distraction. When you learn sexual transmutation, you develop a completely different relationship with time. You become capable of investing energy in long-term projects without despairing over immediate results. You develop strategic patience, the ability to work consistently toward distant goals without losing motivation. You learn to savor the process of building instead of living only for the moments of arrival. This change in relationship with time is crucial for building true empires. Because empires aren't built in weeks or months, but in years and decades of consistent and passionate work. And only men who have mastered their vital energy have the patience and persistence necessary for this kind of undertaking. When you look at humanity's great builders, whether they are artists, entrepreneurs, spiritual leaders, or inventors, You invariably find men who learned to channel their vital force into purposes that transcended their momentary desires. Michelangelo da Vinci, Tesla, Jobs, they all had in common this ability to sublimate primal energy into transcendent creation. And don't think this means a life without pleasure or intimate relationships. On the contrary, when you master your sexual energy, your relationships become infinitely richer and more satisfying, because you're no longer seeking in the other what you can only find in yourself. You're no longer projecting your unmet needs and wants onto your partner. You become capable of loving in a mature and generous way, offering your completeness instead of seeking to complete yourself through the other. Your intimate relationships become encounters between two integrities instead of negotiations between two deficiencies. And that's a difference that transforms not only the quality of physical pleasure, but the entire experience of human connection. For someone who has mastered transmutation, sex ceases to be a compulsion and becomes an art. It's no longer a desperate release of tension, but a conscious celebration of life force. The difference is the same as between desperately drinking water to quench thirst and savoring an extraordinary wine in good company. And so we arrive at the climax of this journey of understanding. The man who learns to use his sexual energy to build empires is not the one who denies his animal nature, but the one who consciously integrates it into his divine nature. He doesn't kill the tiger within. He learns to ride it and direct it where he wants to go. This man understands that each sexual impulse is an opportunity for choice. Each moment of desire is a crossroads where he can choose between momentary slavery or lasting freedom, between pleasure that diminishes or power that increases, between the dispersion that weakens and the concentration that strengthens. And when he consistently makes the choice of transmutation, something extraordinary happens. He doesn't just build external empires, businesses, organizations, movements, works of art, thriving families. He builds the most important empire of all, the empire of himself. He becomes sovereign of his own inner territory, king of his own destiny, architect of his own greatness, and this inner sovereignty inevitably radiates to the outside world. Because a man who is truly free cannot be enslaved by external circumstances. A man who has developed real power cannot be diminished by the opinions of others. A man who has built inner wealth cannot be impoverished by material losses. This is the true empire that every man is called to build. Not an empire that dominates others through force, but an empire that inspires others through example. Not an empire that accumulates resources through exploitation, but an empire that creates value through contribution. Not an empire that lasts a few decades, but an empire that echoes through generations. And it all starts with a seemingly simple decision: what to do with the sexual energy pulsing in your veins at this very moment. You can pour it into another pointless session of masturbation, into another compulsive pursuit of immediate pleasure, into another escape from the responsibility of becoming who you are capable of being. Or you can take a deep breath, feel this energy as the sacred fuel that it truly is, and consciously channel it into the building of something grand, to the strengthening of your will, to the development of your talents, to the creation of value in the world, to the building of the empire that only you can build. This is the choice that defines not only your next moment, but the entire trajectory of your existence. This is the decision that separates the men who build empires from the men who are built by their circumstances. This is the crossroads where you decide whether you will be remembered as someone who wasted their gifts or as someone who transformed them into a legacy. The power is in your hands. The energy is in your veins. The empire is waiting to be built. The only question that remains is, will you have the courage to begin?